Dr. Susie Tanchel is Vice President of Hebrew College in Newton, Massachusetts. Since joining Hebrew College in 2020, Susie established Matarot, Hebrew College's Center for Jewish Professional Learning and Leadership, and designed the new Master of Jewish Education program. Prior to this, she was the head of school at JCDS, Boston's Jewish Community Day School, and before that, she serves as Associate Head of School at Gann Academy, the new Jewish high school of Greater Boston, for 7 years, and had taught Tanakh there for 14 years. Dr. Tanchel earned her doctorate from Brandeis University's Near Eastern and Judaic Studies Department, focusing on development of ancient Israelite religious thought and the teaching of biblical texts in pluralistic Jewish high schools. Dr. Tanchel is the author of numerous articles and currently teaches adult education classes at Hebrew College and in the Wexner Foundation's Heritage Program. Many members of our community have had the pleasure of studying with her in the Hebrew College Tamid program, and we know our community is in for a treat. Dr. Tanchel also coaches educators in the Mandel Foundation's Educational Leadership Fellowship and Jewish Day School professional and lay leaders across North America. Over the course of her career, her teaching, scholarship, and leadership have been recognized by a variety of fellowships and awards, including receiving the Chochmat Lev Award from Keshet and the Covenant Award for Jewish educators. I had the pleasure of learning from Susie at Hebrew College, and I'm delighted to welcome her to Temple Emunah.
Hi, everybody. I saw some of you last night. Still remember that? Excellent. So last night we had, I hope, some fun, learning together and interacting a lot. We're going to be doing that again this afternoon, but for the Dvar Torah, I thought I would just share with you some thoughts. So I hope you'll find that fun of a different kind. So I want to ask a question, though, to start, which is, and don't be afraid, if Sefer Vayikra, if the book of Leviticus is one of your favorite or the favorite book of the Torah, raise your hand. Up, bold, high, let's go. Oh, I have one. Louis, oh, two in the back. Anybody else? Going a third time. 3. Woohoo! That rocks. 3. All right. I know, it's kind of, for the 3 of us, 4 including me, the 4 of us, it's kind of astounding that not everyone loves Sefer Vayikra. This, I know it's hard to believe, maybe you'll feel a little differently in a few minutes' time, because I think it's really, truly fascinating stuff, and I'm going to show you a little bit of why. So the Parsha, if you can all, I know Rabbi Lerner said, please put away your Eitz Chaim. If you can just get them out again. Is that difficult, or is it? Pretty easy. Pretty easy, great. Okay, so we're going to start on page 630, the beginning of Parshat Shmini. So the text there is describing opening day. Opening day of the introduction of formal worship, right? We've just heard last Shabbat, the completion of the Mishkan, and the priest and all that they needed to know what to do. And now we're starting with the introduction of formal worship. So if you look at Pasuk Bet in verse 2, Vayomer el Aharon, Kach lecha egel ben habakar lechatat. The very first sacrifice that is mentioned in this time of formal worship is the purification offering. Given that this is the first sacrifice that is mentioned, I'm led to believe that it must be important. But it doesn't say here how come it's important, what's been contaminated that needs to be purified, how did it get contaminated or polluted in the first place, and how do we need to purify it? So to begin to answer these questions, I want us to look at Parshat Vayikra. Don't turn there right now. We're going to turn elsewhere in a moment. In Parshat Vayikra, which read recently, we're commanded to bring a chatat, a purification offering, when you sin inadvertently. The text says bishgaga, when you do it by mistake. Because like the rabbis that Rabbi Lerner was just talking about, when you do something, biblically speaking, b'yad ramah, on purpose, you're outside of the system. There is no repentance for it. But if you do something bishgaga, inadvertently, you touch a carcass, or you observe a holiday on the wrong day. If you did it bishgaga, if you did it by mistake, you need to bring a chatat offering. I would like you now to turn to page 649, which is the beginning of next week's parsha. I'm actually going to be in the top of page 650, which is Vayikra Perek Yud Bet, Leviticus chapter 12. It says thus, Daber el b'nei Israel lemor, Isha ki tazriya v'yalda zachar, v'tam'a shiv'at yamim kimei didat todah titma. Speak to the Israelite people, when a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. I'm skipping a verse to the next one. Oshloshim yom u'shloshet yamim teshev b'dimei tahara v'chol chodesh lo tiga v'el hamikdash lo tavo ad meloot yamei tahara. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is complete. Uvemeloat yemei tahara, leven o levat, tavi keves ben shnato leola, uven yona otor lechatat, el petach o moed el kohen, the same sacrifice. On the completion of her period of purification, for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove. They have some awareness of economic inequality. A pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. V'hikrivu lifnei Adonai v'chiper aleha v'tahara mimakor dameha zot torat hayoledet lezachar or lenekeva. He shall offer it before Adonai and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be pure from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child. I feel like that should be she. Concerning her who bears a child, male or female. Okay, so the woman needs to bring a chatat, needs to bring a purification offering after giving birth. So, we've learned about 2 reasons that you have to bring a chatat offering. One is if you do something bishgaga, if you do something by mistake. A second is if you become in a state of severe impurity. The instance we just read was giving birth, but there are many, many instances. For the woman who just gave birth, there's a 2-step process, right? Firstly, she goes through a period of purification, and then she goes to the priest for expiation. She can't bring the sacrifice until she is pure again. That's what the text said. So we can't be bringing a chatat for her to be purified. She's already purified. She wouldn't be able to be in the Mishkan. She wouldn't be able to go to the tent of meeting if she weren't pure. So she's already pure. So what the heck is the chatat purifying? In chapter 8 of Vayikra it states, Vayigash et parachatat vayismach Aharon uvanav et yedehem al rosh parachatat. Vayishchat vayikach Moshe et hadam vayitein al karnot hamizbeach saviv ve'etzba'o vayichateh. Same word, vayichateh et hamizbeach ve'et hadam yatzak el yesod hamizbeach vayikadshehu lechaper alav. He led the bull of the purification offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the bull of the purification offering, and it was slaughtered. Moses took the blood And with his, can you just visualize this? It's kind of gross. Moshe took the blood with his finger, put some on each of the horns of the altar, thereby purifying the altar. Then he poured out the blood at the base of the altar. Thus he consecrated it in order to make expiation upon it. The blood purifies the altar. The blood is the ritual detergent. Think ancient Tide. The blood purifies the altar. So we don't think, it's not about clean and dirty. It's about pure and impure. Dig deep into your religious imagination for a moment. Imagine spraying blood. Make something pure, even though it probably reeked to high heaven. So what we are imagining here is something happening in the spiritual world, not in the metaphysical world. Likewise, contamination happens in the spiritual world. It is not visible to us. Do they still have cooties around? Is that still a thing? Yeah, I think it's kind of like cooties. We didn't have those in South Africa. But nonetheless, even if it's not visible to us, this contamination in the religious world and in ancient Israel matters a lot. The altar is contaminated when people err inadvertently or they come into contact with severe impurity. Moshe commanded a purification offering as the first sacrifice because occurrences of inadvertent sin and severe impurities would continually pollute the altar. Here's the key. The essential notion is that impurity is a dynamic force. It's harmful to the sphere of sacred, and it attacks whether you're standing right next to the altar or you're standing miles and miles away. So let's think about for a moment, what does that mean, biblically speaking? No matter where you are standing in Eretz Israel, your impurity or your inadvertent misdeed pollutes the altar. You haven't done something terrible, something wrong, it's not like the sin to end all sins. But you need to take responsibility for your action. Your individual action has affected the altar in the tent of meeting and later in the Beit HaMikdash. And God's presence is in the Mishkan or in the Beit HaMikdash. So if we keep doing things just in our everyday life that pollute the altar and we don't take care of it, God's presence is not going to want to hang there. I have it on good authority. God's presence only wants to be in places that are kind of pure. You know what happened with the Babylonian exile? God didn't want to hang out in the Beit HaMikdash anymore. We're going to talk more about that later this evening. If God leaves, ancient Israelites, the world, are incredibly vulnerable. It's a very serious matter, indeed, one of life and death. Being accountable for our individual actions is essential, and being responsible for their communal impact is of tremendous significance to the community. In the very next chapter, as we've heard already this morning, we read about the tragic results of individual choices. We learn that what can happen when people choose to act not in accordance with God's law. Nadav and Avihu, two of Aaron's sons, offer an Eish Zarah, a strange fire. And as a result, God's fire went forth and consumed them. Now, I'll admit, I have read this parak a few times before I started preparing for today. So though Aaron's silence initially surprised me, I'm used to it now. But what I had not paid attention to before preparing, which is thank you for this opportunity to learn more, is that what God says to Aaron right after his sons die. So that's in Vayikra 10, 8 through 11, which is on the top of page 635. Top of page 635, Leviticus 10, starting in verse 8. Vaydaber Adonai el Aharon lemor, Yayin v'shechar al teisht, ata uvanecha ata b'voachem el oel moed, v'lo tamutu chukat olam l'dorotechem. Ulahavdil ben hakodesh uven hachol, uven hatameh uven hatahor. Ulahorot et bnei Israel et kol hachukim asher diber Adonai lahem. B'yad Moshe. God said to Aharon, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages, for you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the impure and the pure, and you must teach the Israelites all the laws which Adonai has imparted to them through Moses. Immediately following Aaron's son's death, when God speaks to him, God does not mention, as might be expected, their death, but rather, perhaps surprisingly, talks about intoxicants. Kind of weird, no? So you've already heard this morning that there's some different interpretations about why these verses are here. Some say because Nadav and Avihu were drunk when they crossed the boundary, or that the danger is that the other priests, the Reeve family, would get drunk and no longer able to serve God. Okay, those are certainly possible. But something else here caught my eye. In the end, I believe these verses are a later addition to the original story and have a much deeper message beyond the specifics of this incident. Kind of interesting, huh? Let's start with why I believe they were incorporated after the original story had been written. Firstly, as commentators have noticed, these verses interrupt the story about the death of Aaron's sons. Because that resumes in Pasuk Yud Bet, right? It says in verse 12, Moses spoke to Aaron and to his remaining sons, and goes forth from there. Secondly, as Ibn Ezra has noted, God usually speaks to Aharon with Moshe, or to Moshe alone. It's rare that Aharon is alone. Yes, I did track how many times that happened. Moreover, special expression here jumped out at me. The words Hukat Olam L'Dorotechem, this is a law for all time throughout the ages, is a combination of words I know to be used only by one particular source that composed the Torah. Likewise, Ulahavdil ben HaKodesh uven HaChol uven HaTameh uven HaTahor, this source or school of thought used these expressions for specific theological and ideological reasons. So I'm going to pause here just for a minute to just, as a reminder or a brief introduction, there are 5 sources that are said to have written the Torah. J-E-P-D-H, I'll get to them. J and E, early narrative sources, and later D, the Deuteronomist that wrote the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to put J, E, and D to the side, and we're going to focus our attention this morning on the other 2 sources, known as the priestly source and the holiness school. Affectionately, in my world, we call them P and H. Priestly source, holiness school. Everybody with me so far? This is where it gets kind of cool. The work of Professor Israel Knoll of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem has shown, and I would say proven, that these 2 sources are distinct from each other, each having their own foci and belief. The older priestly source, P, focuses its attention on everything to do with the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash, anything to do with the cult, anything to do with the temple, with the priests, with what they wear, with how they do their sacrifices, all that jazz. You might say they were the intellectuals living in the ivory tower with little concern for the life of the average Israelite. It wasn't their jam. They had their stuff going on. In the words of Israel Knoll, just as the priesthood is detached from society, so too it is unrelated to the difficulties of human existence or the crisis of the nation. The priestly source is not engaged much with the experience of the average people, no matter whether they were flourishing or suffering. The heyday of this group, this source, is the time of the Solomonic temple. At the same time as the temple stood, a prophetic voice was in Israel, and they did have concern for everyday folks. Think about the prophet Amos, who critiqued the people of Israel when he said, "Assuredly, because you impose a tax on the poor and exact from them a levy of grain, for I have noticed how many are your crimes and how countless your sins. You, enemies of the righteous, you takers of bribes, you who subvert in the gate the cause of the needy. I loathe, I spurn your festivals. I am not appeased by your solemn assemblies. If you offer me burnt offerings, I will not accept them. Spare me the sound of your hymns, and let me not hear the music of your lutes." One of my favorite biblical verses of all time. But let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream. Amos is admonishing the people to prioritize treating others justly and righteously. A familiar theme of prophets who were critiquing our people, they were critiquing us for being observant of religious commandments, which we might call ben adam lamakom, while acting immorally and unjustly, and therefore violating mitzvot ben adam lechavero. This was unacceptable. Actions in the religious and in the civil realms are of similar importance. In response to this, so we have the PE guys in the temple, and we have the prophet saying, "Yo, there's a world down here happening that you have to pay attention to." In response to this, a school of thought arose that was concerned both with the lives of the everyday people and matters of the cult, what I have come to call cult and conscience. I want to publish that one day. Religious meant not only worship, but also morality. They care not only about the priests, but about all people, the average Joe or Josephine Israelite. They are concerned not only for now, but for all time. This source was named the Holiness School, for they wrote the law, Kedoshim Tiyu, Ki Kadosh Ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. In my dissertation, I showed how a key concern of the school, they're my guys, I showed that a key concern of this school was separations, havdalot. So it's no surprise then at this moment, when Aaron's sons had overstepped an important boundary, that the Holiness School had to step in, chose to step in, to reiterate just how essential it is to adhere to boundaries and maintain them for all time. Boundaries are what enable us to distinguish between the sacred and the profane, between the pure and the impure. The consequences of not abiding by the separation in life, in some cases, can lead to death. The root bet dalad lamed in the hifil binyan, in the causative binyan, means to cause a separation, that is, to differentiate. According to H, it is important to differentiate because we are emulating God when we do this. Indeed, right from the outset, in Bereshit Perek Aleph, we see God making separations. After creating the light, Vayara Elohim et ha'or, ki tov, vayavdel, badal, hifil. Same root, same verb group. Vayavdel Elohim bein ha'or uvein ha'koshech. God separated the light from the darkness. This root appears 5 times in one chapter in the same form. Next time it comes and you see Breshit Aleph again, you'll think, look, Susie was right. It appears 5 times. It says in verse 6, Vayomer Elohim Yehi Rakia b'toch hamayim Vayehi mavdil ben mayim lamayim. God makes a separation between the water from the water. God makes physical separations between 2 states. Since we are created in God's image and are commanded to be holy, part of how we do imitatio Deo, part of how we follow God's examples is by making separations in life. And this part is critically important. Both in the cultic sphere we make separations and in the seemingly secular one. In this parsha we just read this morning, Zot Torat HaBehema v'ha'af b'chol ha'nefesh ha'chaya ha'romeset b'mayim u'lechol nefesh ha'shoretzet al ha'aretz lahavdil ben ha'tamei u'ven ha'tahor u'ven ha'chaya ha'na'achelet u'ven ha'chaya asher lo te'achel. These are the instructions concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that swarm on earth, for distinguishing between the impure and the pure, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten. This is an incredible move by the Holiness School. Incredible. The Holiness School has moved sacredness out of just being in the cult and into what previously had been thought of as the non-sacred. It extends sacred living. I believe that really this is a proto-Pharisaic or proto-rabbinic move. I believe the Holiness School is where all of what we're doing today really began. Our actions, they are telling us, our actions in the everyday matter. There are opportunities for holiness, that is to follow God's example, and to create separateness in the everyday for every person. It's amazing, it's revolutionary. The Holiness School was revolutionary. They took holiness, it belonged in the cult, and they said, no, it belongs in the everyday, and in the everyday, you're going to be like God when you do these separations. A few chapters later, the Holiness School makes this connection even more explicit when they write in Leviticus chapter 20. God says, you shall possess the land, for I will give it to you to possess, a land, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. I, the Lord, I'm your God, who set you apart from other peoples. Hivdalti etchen min ha'amim. So you shall set apart. I set you apart, so you shall set apart the pure beast from the impure bird from the pure. You shall be holy. V'yitim li kedoshim ki kadosh ani Adonai. Va'avdel etchem min ha'amim lihiyot li. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. I have set you apart from the other peoples to be mine. So by choosing to uphold these separations, we are continually showing ourselves to be created in God's image and striving to be holy. This is what it means to be God's people. The work of creating appropriate boundaries and the work of attaining holiness are intimately connected. Thus, when you violate boundaries like Nadav and Avihu did, even if you're a priest, or maybe especially when you're a religious leader, your violation of holiness and precisely what it means to be God's people cannot be permitted to stand. But the text goes even further than that. It is precisely in this moment that the Holiness School Davka chooses to interrupt the priestly narrative, to say to each of us, lest you think this is just about religious leaders, no. It applies to each of us every day. Over the course of our lives, we make countless choices, small and momentous ones, about whether to make holy choices that uphold and represent our best values. In closing, I want to say that this week's Parsha, Shmini, compellingly asks us to recognize the profound power we each have in our lives. From 2 different biblical sources, the Parsha reminds us that our personal choices matter beyond ourselves. Firstly, if we make inadvertent errors, there still might be a serious communal impact for which we are responsible. Secondly, not adhering to boundaries in life can have a significant communal impact for which we are accountable. It is our individual, continual responsibility to work to be holy and to model ourselves after God's example. Though we act as individuals, our destinies are undoubtedly interconnected. What you do affects me. What I do affects you. Imagine how different our world might be if more of us treated this concept with great seriousness. Shabbat Shalom. Shalom.